So, John, I am so excited that you're able to be with us today and chat for a little bit. We met last year at the American Academy of Sciences and
Hmm.
Letters Gala at the Library of Congress, in which at which you received a Berry Prize. So that was October 2023. You've been very busy since then, and I'm delighted to have you here. For those of you who don't know, Jonathan Haidt is a professor, Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. You were trained as a scientist, John,
Social psychologist, yes.
social psychologist. You
Hmm.
work at the intersection of morality, emotions, and culture. And you've written several best-selling books, starting with the Happiness Hypothesis, The Righteous Mind, The Coddling of the American Mind, and your most recent book, The Anxious Generation. So thank you so much for coming and chatting.
Oh, my pleasure, Meg. I'm very grateful to the American Academy of Sciences and Letters for the Barry Prize and for that beautiful evening. I mean, that building, the reception was just gorgeous. So thanks to the Academy for that.
Yeah, it's spectacular setting. So I wanted to start by just asking you to kind of shed some light for those of you who might not be as familiar with your work on the intellectual through line of your work. I mean, you've written several books, and
Mhm.
what's the thread that connects your work and these ideas?
Well, until recently, I thought there wasn't exactly a thread because my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis, was not on my work. It grew out of my teaching Psych 101 at the University of Virginia. And it was on 10 ancient ideas and a psychological analysis of ideas that were great truths, East and West. So that seemed to be off to itself, but it comes back later. Then my next book, The Righteous Mind, was about my work. That was the story of my career, my research, what morality is, where it comes from, how it develops, how it varies across cultures, moral foundations theory, politics, everything, and religion too. So that was really, I thought, my great work, my main book. And then I was going to write a book on capitalism and morality, kind of an extension of The Righteous Mind. I'd moved to New York University's Stern School of Business in 2011, and the cultural war was raging over economic issues, austerity versus stimulus. So I thought I'd write a whole book on that, and I got a contract for it. And then weird stuff started happening at Yale and at many other schools. We now know it as the Great Awakening. But my friend Greg Lukianoff came to me and said, John, weird stuff is happening. And I have a hypothesis about how somehow we're teaching them to think in distorted ways that are making people depressed and anxious. So then I wrote, with Greg, we wrote The Coddling the American Mind. And I thought that was a separate project. I brought in a social psychological, moral psychological lens, and also some developmental psychology into that book. So I thought I had three separate books that were not really connected. And then I set out to write a book on what social media is doing to democracy. And I got a contract for that. The book will be called Life After Babel, Adapting to a World We May Never Again Share. And I was going to return to sort of, my work on morality and society. But by the time I wrote the first chapter was just going to be like, hey, all that stuff in the coddling, like that book was about overprotection, but I've got all this new data on what social media is doing to kids. This was also, I thought, a side project. And I've been collecting it for years and analyzing and organizing it. And I said, let me just write one chapter on what social media did to teens when they moved on. And then we'll look at what social media and the whole digital world did to democracy when we moved our public life onto these platforms. And by the time I wrote the first chapter, which became chapter one of the new book, where I laid out what has happened to people born after 1995, what has happened to them? Why are they so anxious and depressed and such high suicide rates? Once I laid that out and saw that it wasn't just us, it was international, I realized, whoa, this is a much larger story, and I have to get this out right away. So I split the book in two, and I wrote The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. The through line turns out to be human systems are really complex and they often malfunction. And that's what intrigues me. That's what I'm always looking at. How is it that human systems go wrong because of our psychology? That's the social psychology element. And I discovered early on that the ancients had brilliant insights into consciousness and social relationships. And I've quoted them in every one of my books, especially Marcus Aurelius and Buddha, Jesus, well, and then you come up closer, Shakespeare. So there really is a through line in that I think all my books are really, really broad because I'm interested in everything. And I kind of majored in random studies as an undergraduate. I just took lots of different courses because I was just interested in lots of things. So the through line is our complex systems are malfunctioning in ways that are really puzzling to us now and frightening. But we can actually understand some of the complexity of it if we draw on the social sciences and on history and the humanities and ancient wisdom.
Yeah, well, you certainly struck a nerve with this latest book. I think it's really resonating with a lot of people. It resonates with me as a psychiatrist
Hmm.
who, treats patients, and as well as a parent. So thank you for your work. I want to kind of take a little deeper dive into the anxious generation. So you describe, as you've alluded to, how basically there's two problems that have emerged that have, as you say, messed up childhood. One is these overprotection from the real world. And then paradoxically, or maybe ironically, this underprotection of children from the virtual world.
Mhm.
And you outline in the book lots of evidence for to support the kind of damages that have been done by the phone-based childhood, as you call it. And you outline the collective action that we need to take as individuals, as communities, as society, to reverse these damages, these harms. So, really, you're leading a movement. And I'm just hoping that you can tell us what we need to do. What are you calling
Sure.
us to do?
Yeah, I'm calling on parents all over the world and schools and politicians to restore the essential element of childhood, which is play, especially unsupervised outdoor play. We evolved in the natural world. Children play in a very predictable way. They just as they walk in a very predictable way. And they need huge amounts of experience, thousands, tens of thousands of repetitions of various things, physical development, climbing trees, jumping over rocks, getting into arguments, getting out of arguments. They need a lot of this in the real world. And then gradually it will wire up their brain and they will become competent adults. Also along the way, there has to be a very long period of intense socialization with content, cultural content coming from the elders down to you. So that's the way it's been for literally millions of years until around 2010. And then we changed it. Now, we began to change it in the 90s when we stopped letting kids out to play. It's too dangerous. You'll get kidnapped. Everybody is a sexual molester. We can't trust anybody. So that hits us in the 90s, even though the world was actually getting much safer in the 90s. Crime plummets, drunk driving plummets. So we made a mistake by overprotecting our kids in the 90s. We blocked them from going out to play. And that hit especially the millennials. But they didn't actually get depressed. Their mental health was actually a little better than Gen X before them. But any kid born in 1996 and later is very different. Not everyone, but on average. I'm a social scientist. These are, averages when you look at large data sets. What we find on average is that kids born in 1996 and later, they're Gen Z, they have much, much higher rates. I mean, the lines begin, it's very sharp. It's like a hockey stick. The lines go along steadily through late Gen X and into the millennials, stable levels of mental illness. And then right at 2011, or 2012, rather, 2012, 2013, right there, you get a huge inflection point. You get a hockey stick, and young people get really, really anxious and depressed. Millennials who are now in their 20s, they're not much affected. It's really, the key is, did you go through puberty with a flip phone, meeting up with your friends, in which case you're a millennial, and you probably are not suffering from an anxiety disorder? Or did you go through puberty on a smartphone with a front-facing camera, high-speed internet? Everyone else was on Instagram, so you got on Instagram after 2012 when Facebook bought it. If you went through puberty on your phone instead of in the real world, it interferes with what sort of brain development is expecting. There's a concept called experience expectant neural development. That phone-based childhood interferes. Now, it's not that the majority are anxious and depressed, but among girls, it's about 40%. So, I mean, that's a lot of girls to be suffering. It's more than double what it used to be. So my point is, we made a huge mistake in overprotecting our kids in the real world. That was pointless, and it made them less bold, less less tough in some ways, but they didn't get depressed. It wasn't until we changed puberty. Now, as I said before, in puberty, especially, you really need information from the elders. That's why you have initiation rites all around the world. So cultures have to socialize their kids. But what did we do? Once kids are hooked up so that they're on Instagram or TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, once they're hooked up, and a third of them say they're on those social media platforms all day long, almost all the time. So a third of our kids are on these, and half say they're on their phones almost all the time. Once you do that, you're blocking brain development, and instead of getting socialization from the elders, you're getting it from random weirdos on the internet who were chosen for you because of their emotional extremity, which got them likes, which got the algorithm found was related to something that you lingered on. So I really focus a lot in the book on puberty. So we messed up childhood by not letting them play. We messed up puberty by having our kids be socialized by these bizarre 30-second videos.
Yeah, and I was really impressed by the data that you presented about even if we don't have our phones on or aren't looking at them, if they're in our proximity, if they're reachable, how distracting that can be all day long to kids.
Yeah, I should just note a recent meta-analysis came out suggesting that if the phone is simply on your desk and you can see it, that may not have much of an effect. That's controversial. There's studies on both sides on that. But if your phone is around and you're getting notifications, there's no doubt. There's a lot of, I mean, that clearly is disruptive. And the fact that our kids are getting notifications all day long in school and they're responding to them and they're texting and they're looking at videos and porn is completely insane. So you asked me before, what am I calling on people to do? I'm leading a movement at anxiousgeneration.com. I hope everyone who watches this will go sign up, anxiousgeneration.com, because despite the size of this mess, and it's affecting people all over the developed world, we don't know about the developing world, but we got into it because it's a collective action problem. Every kid has to be on Instagram because every other kid is on Instagram. That's the reason. By the time they're in high school or college, they often say, I wish I wasn't on this. This is really messing me up, but I can't quit. My students said, "And what you tell me, I can't quit because everyone else is on it. I don't want to be left out." So it's a collective action trap, and the way to get out is with collective action solutions. So what I'm proposing is 4 norms. And if we don't need everybody, but if we can get a lot of people, maybe a majority, to adopt these 4 norms, we can solve the problem for almost $0. So the first norm is no smartphone before 14. Parents should not give their kid the entire internet so that strangers can reach them while they're in bed, while they're in school. This is just complete insanity. So no smartphone till 14. Give them a flip phone, give them a phone watch, give them a way they can text, but not the whole internet and all the platforms. Second norm is no social media before 16. The internet's really useful. In the 90s, the millennials loved it and they flourished and they created companies and they're doing fine. But things changed with the introduction of super viral social media around 2009. You get the like button, the retweet button. Things really get intense in the early 2010s. So just don't expose your 12-year-old to that. I mean, that's the beginning of puberty. Social media I can't believe we're even having this conversation about like, well, is it okay for a 10-year-old to be looking at pornography and beheading videos? Like, well, talk to your child, so no social media till 16. The third is really powerful. It's phone-free schools, and this is so exciting. This is happening all over the world now in 2024. A lot of people are ready. All the teachers hate the phones. All the principals hate the phones. My book came out in late March, and that kind of gave a lot of schools the ammunition they needed. It energized parents to push. Movements were happening before, especially in the UK, before my book came out. But I think my book really came at a time when everyone was seeing like, this is crazy. We can see that it's harmful, but what do we do? What do we do? So it's very easy. Phone-free schools. When the kid comes in, you put your phone in a locker, a special phone locker, or a Yonder pouch, a lockable pouch, and then they have 6.5 hours in which they can talk to each other, and they can listen to the teacher. But if they have their phones, they don't do much of either of the others. And then the final norm is the hardest. because it's the one where we have to actually change ourselves, we parents, we elders. And that is far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. If we're going to take away the phone-based childhood, we can't just expect kids to sit quietly at home doing nothing. Okay, they could read books, that would be nice, but they're not going to read that many books. We have to give them back a fun childhood like we all had, where we had some ability to go have adventures with our friends and take risks and sometimes get hurt and fall in love and have exciting times and laugh our heads off. Think about the amount of time you spent joking and laughing with your friends when you were young. We hung out a lot. Now imagine taking all that time you spent with your friends, joking and laughing and hanging around, cut that by 70%. Imagine taking 70% of that away from your child because everyone's just on their phone doing this. Yes, you've got emojis, and yes, memes are funny. It's not that there's no laughter, but it's not shared physical laughter. There's something about laughing together that really bonds people. And as soon as teen social life moved onto social media around 2012, that's when teens start getting really lonely. Our teens are so lonely. These platforms designed to connect them to thousands of people, there's an opportunity cost there. If you're connecting with thousands of people, that means you have no time for your friends and your family in the real world. You're not going to be seeing them in the real world. Everything's on the phone.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as an adult, obviously, I think we can all connect with these ideas too. We all have had these experiences of being distracted by our phones, not spending time with the person in front of us because we're, scrolling endlessly. But just thinking about how magnified that is coming at these critical times of psychological development, it's astounding, really. So I'm really excited about your work. I'm glad that it's had the traction that it has. And, it's very clear that you're leading a revolution, which is tremendously important. So I'm just curious what's next for you. I know that you allude in the book that you're trying out some ideas on your Substack after Babel. I'm hoping that it has something to do with Durkheim because I loved that section of the
Yes.
book on spiritual
Yes.
degradation. So please tell me what you're up to next.
Sure. There's so we're talking about the complete transformation of childhood, and we have to change it back in a lot of ways. We're talking about the complete transformation of the technosphere, the sort of the world of technology that we live in. Right now, you and I are on Zoom. I've got my AirPods in. The technology is great. The technology is amazing. It's a great tool for adults. But technology it's said, culture is upstream from politics, but technology is upstream from culture. So the goal isn't to get rid of all the technology. The goal is to learn how to live with it. And the most important thing seems to be to recognize kids aren't adults. Kids need to grow up in the real world, and then we can give them all kinds of technology when they're adults. So what's next is, so I have this great Substack. I resisted getting a Substack for a long time because I thought I didn't have time to write, but it's an amazing format which you can just put ideas out. We invite all kinds of interesting people to write. So what's next is a few things, a few themes. One is the community theme, which you alluded to. So in the book, we do say, we look at why is it that it's not everybody is getting depressed by this. It's especially, it looks as though kids who are in religious families or conservative families are somewhat protected. Their rates do go up, but not as much as kids in liberal or secular families. And we think the reason is very Durkheimian. It's that religion, as conservative religion especially, roots kids in a network of dense obligations that might seem repressive, and sometimes is, but they were anchored into real people, older people, traditions, religion, ideas, meaning. They were anchored in when the tsunami came, and it really was a tsunami around 2010 to 2015. And kids who were not anchored, kids who were just here, you're 10 years old, here's your phone. Yeah, you can just sit in your room for hours and hours. Those kids got washed out to sea. And they are anxious, they are more fragile, they're in bad shape. Again, not all, maybe not even a majority, but we're not talking 5 or 10% here. We're talking somewhere between 20 and 50%, I think, are visibly, well, they're less than they would have been if they had a normal childhood, I'll put it that way. So where are we going next? Much more exploration of the community theme. We have a lot of new writing by Zach Roush and on the Substack, and about religious communities. Another theme that I'm looking into, an area I'll go next, is educational technology. So in schools, kids are on screens all day long. Sometimes it's their phone, sometimes it's an iPad, sometimes it's a Chromebook, sometimes it's some other computer. So it's screens all day long from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed. So step one is let's get the personal phones out so they're not texting as much, but they can still text on some of these other devices. So the next area I'll be looking at is educational technology. It looks as though the educational technology is backfiring. It all came in around 2012 again, and that's exactly when test scores all over the world begin to decline. So the educational technology seems to, it has benefits in theory, but the distraction effects are so massive, they wipe out any conceivable benefit. So I'm not certain of that yet, but I need to look into that. That's where I'm going for schools. And then also for expanding out to adults, especially young adults. I think the book is really strong on children and on adolescence and through puberty. But what about, the hundreds of millions of people in their 20s and 30s and even older people like us? So that's where I'm going next. I'll be looking for sure at dating apps and gambling. Because even though those aren't widely used by kids under 18, there is gambling for kids under 18 in certain ways. But the really hardcore gambling that's destroying so many boys and putting them into debt, that is, more for young adults. And so I'll be looking at that. Gambling, dating apps, a bunch of other things that I think are really just cutting off human potential. And I want a flourishing society. I want a flourishing liberal democratic society. And there's a lot of areas that I could be pushing on or studying. And I've decided that this one, restoring the play-based childhood, rolling back the phone-based childhood, this is the one where if I push for the next 2 or 3 years, I think we're going to see gigantic changes, and those are already happening. So I would urge people, if you're watching this, I hope you'll visit anxiousgeneration.com. That has all kinds of resources for parents and teachers and legislators. I hope you will sign up for my Substack. Go to afterbabel.com. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. We put out lots of great content. And then also, if you have kids under about, say, 12 or 13, I hope you go to letgrow.org. I co-founded it with Lenore Skenazy. It gives you ideas on how to give your kids back a free-range childhood, a real-world childhood.
Thank you. And also the book is fantastic, so highly recommend. Thank you, John, for being here with us, and being able to catch up was just a blessing. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Meg.
Take care.